Benvenuti, siete sul Sentiero Sottile. Oggi, per accogliere il nostro ospite, volgiamo nuovamente lo sguardo verso Oriente, un arcipelago che nei secoli è stato isola e nei secoli è stato impero. Eh, impero è luogo di trasformazione e di tradizione, una civiltà in cui l'arte, la disciplina e la visione si sono intrecciate nella trama del tempo. È da questo orizzonte complesso e consapevole che emerge il pensiero del nostro ospite, il professor Ken Jimbo. Oggi abbiamo il piacere di ospitare il professor Jimbo, giapponese, autorevole esperto di sicurezza internazionale e di strategia nell'Indo-Pacifico. Il professor Jimbo è Managing Director of Programs per la International House of Japan, Co-Director Research Institute for New Frontiers ed è anche Professor of International Relations per la Keio University di Tokyo. Prima di continuare, chiediamo a chi ci segue un piccolo gesto, è semplice ma per noi è estremamente importante: iscriversi al canale. È un gesto gratuito, ma che ci permette concretamente di continuare questo percorso e di sostenere il lavoro necessario per organizzare gli incontri, i dialoghi e gli appuntamenti con ospiti internazionali di così alto profilo. Portare avanti questi confronti richiede tempo, dedizione e un impegno costante. Il vostro sostegno fa realmente la differenza. Grazie. Il professore è noto per il suo lavoro sulle politiche di sicurezza, sulle alleanze strategiche e sulle dinamiche geopolitiche nell'Asia orientale. E nel corso della sua carriera il nostro ospite ha anche collaborato come advisor del Ministry of Defense Japan e del National Security Secretariat giapponese, contribuendo direttamente alla elaborazione delle strategie di sicurezza nazionale del Giappone. Ma vorrei ancora dire due parole sulla International House of Japan, perché rappresenta oggi uno dei più importanti luoghi di incontro tra le diplomazie e la cultura e la ricerca e l'analisi strategica dell'Asia-Pacifico, contribuendo al confronto internazionale, quindi sulle grandi trasformazioni contemporanee. A condurre, a condurre questa intervista sarà il nostro prezioso collaboratore, Elia Giovanni, che ha preparato per il professor Jimbo alcune domande particolarmente interessanti sui nuovi scenari strategici e tecnologici dell'Indo-Pacifico. Professor Jimbo, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We sincerely thank you for the honor you have given today to our platform of analysis and discussion. Your presence, your experience, and your analytical insight um, represent a contribution of great value for us and for our audience. Thank you very much again for the time you have dedicated to us. At this point, I will hand over to Elia Giovanni, who will conduct the interview. Elia, enjoy the interview and the conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again, Professor. We can start with the first question. And the first question is, Professor Jimbo, in your view, how is the growing technological competition, particularly in semiconductors and artificial intelligence, reshaping the logic of international security and the strategic calculus among major powers in the Indo-Pacific, also in light of critical dossiers such as Taiwan?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this show, and very much pleased to communicate with audiences. And the question regarding the technologies and its implication to the geopolitics in Indo-Pacific, and I think it is reshaping the very logic of international relations and semiconductor, AI, quantum, cyberspace, and also associated with data infrastructure as a whole have been becoming the foundation for military capability and also the economic resilience and also the political influence in the region. So every prospect of current international relationship, when I look at the summit meeting, ministerial meetings, it has been the technologies that really dominates to occupy the whole spectrum of the state transaction as of today. And let me give you, I think, three aspects in the Indo-Pacific. And the first, I think, especially the semiconductor have become the strategic choke point for us. And especially by obtaining the advanced chip indispensable for the artificial intelligence. And that is a baseline for production of next generation weaponaries and weapon systems, including precision weapons and autonomous systems and intelligence analysis and cyber operations. And those are heavily in need for every spectrum of Indo-Pacific policy. And that's number one. And the second seems to be AI is changing the speed and the character of strategic competition on every front. And look at the US-China summit meeting it just take place, and how it really plays out in a sense that the AI competition is really the core of the strategic competition of the United States and China. And again, that is the baseline to determine the next generation battlefields. Who can be faster and who can be more systemic in bringing in those AI-driven decision-centric system plus AI-supported those unmanned system in a battlefields will be a definite factor that has been already taking place in Ukraine and also that has been widely spread in United States-Iran, confrontation. But also it is true in the Indo-Pacific theater. And eventually, on the third, is also that the transforming the alliance strategy. And I think at the how much we can really align ourselves in the like-minded states, cooperation strategy on the AI and also the next generation strategy is really defining where we are and how much we can really share the platform of the research and development cooperation and how much we are well enough in bringing those basic seed technologies to the weapon system. The speed and scale and the production capacity will have really becoming I think, at the characterization to define the alliance threats in the 21st century. Those are my perspective on your questions.
Yes, thank you. And for the second question, Professor Jimbo, to what extent can Europe play a meaningful strategic role in the Indo-Pacific, and how do you assess the risk that miscalculation or unintended escalation, potentially within increasingly hybrid and technologically driven form of conflict, could shape the future of regional and global security?
And that's, I think, the great question. And I think Europe can play a meaningful strategic role in Indo-Pacific, but we should be realistic about the nature of that role. And I think that, we often cite the famous terminology by former Prime Minister Kishida, Ukraine today can be the East Asia tomorrow, and which really connotates the connectivity of European theater and also the Indo-Pacific theater. So, in the perspective that many of the European countries send those deploy the ships to Indian Ocean and also to the wider Indo-Pacific, we really welcome those types of the further deployment of the European states. And that will really brings about the physical connectivity of the two theater, and which is important in several sense. One is that, if European comes into our theater, it is symbolically a very important force multiplier in terms of making the situation more global. For example, China regards Taiwan is the domestic issue. Senkaku is the domestic issue, so as the South China Sea. But if the European players come into the theater and said, and this is the global issue, which creates the global concern even for Europe, and which is, I think that the normative effect is very important in here. And secondly, there's not only the kind of European physical presence in Asia and the Asian physical presence, vice versa, in Europe, but it's also connected via technological standards and the defense innovation base as well. So if we were really coordinate our defense industry strategy deeply enough, we can innovate much faster, adapting to the new security environments, and then we can actually help each other's battlefields in the inter-theater domain. For example, that Ukrainians are using like more than 10 ammunitions a day in the battlefield to sustain the front line, and which is a very important to show the capacity, how much we can continuously actually provide and deploy those ammunitions and equipments and drone technologies in the front line, where there needs the stronger surge of the defense innovation capacity at the time that they are fighting against adversaries. So if Ukraine is in problem, I think that the Asia Pacific nation also needs to help them. And if we are in problem, we are also asking European nations to help our kind of the needs for the capacity, and then that it has become the, I think, essential component of our deterrence strategy. So that we are still far away in the distance, so we are not aiming at fighting together side by side. But in terms of the defense technologies and defense equipments and defense industry cooperation, and that may have a very important impact for each other's deterrence structure.
Yes, thank you. Really, really thank you. And for the third question, Professor Jimbo, Japan is undergoing one of the most significant transformation of its security posture since the post-war era, including increased defense spending, new counter-strike capabilities, and deeper strategic coordination with partners such as the United States and NATO. In your view, is Japan simply adapting to a more dangerous regional environment, or are we witnessing the emergence of a fundamentally new strategic identity for Japan within the Indo-Pacific order?
Well, thank you for that question. And by looking at the security situation surrounding Japan, we are increasingly aware of the quite severe security environment surrounding Japan. Rise of China constantly pressure to change the strategic balance between Japan and China, and also China and the United States combined. And also North Korea seeming to be fully determined to become a nuclear power, and they are also developing the multiple platform of the delivery systems. And Far Eastern Russia no longer hesitate to become a strategic spoilers. And what makes us more complicated is that those three actors are coordinating their capabilities and action all together. Look at the China. Russia is now coordinating strategically on every spectrum of the coordination between two sides. And North Korea is sending their troops to Ukrainian forefront. And in return, we actually speculate that Russia will be providing the high-end technologies to North Korea that will really speed up the process of what North Korea wish to achieve in their defense strategy. So that the situation is very severe, and Japan has to adapt itself to how we can really maintain our independence, security, and also our deterrence and defense strategy. And the question is, how are we going to achieve that perspective? First, definitely, we would have to invest our own defense capability to achieve fundamentally reinforced self-defense force capability in order to make ourselves more tangibly reliable in defending ourselves. So that self-defense is essentially important aspects, especially by looking at the full spectrum of the challenges from the gray zone to small-scale contingency to the high-end confrontation. We will try to attain our best to deal by ourselves as an initial responder. But at the same time that the Chinese capabilities far exceed our capability on every spectrum, sea, air, and also in the ground, missiles, space technologies, and also integrated AI-driven decision-centric warfighting capability. They are the one who are investing a lot, and which really jeopardize our concept of attaining the favorable balance of power in Northeast Asia. In that perspective, that the credibility of U.S. security guarantee for the Japanese defense and the regional defense is remaining to be essential for Asia. And I think that there are a lot of conversation going on in Europe, whether how much that the Europe can achieve its strategic autonomy. And I think it has a certain logic because many of European major states, defense capability and defense budgets are combined. Even without the United States, you can surpass the numbers of what the Russians may have. Of course, that there's a lot of asymmetrical capability you can find on the nuclear weapons and also the ground capability and so. But strategic autonomy in Europe has its own logic to pursue by European states. But if you count the numbers of Japanese, Australian, Filipino, Korean capability altogether, it is far below the number that China can really pose upon us. In that sense, that it is very hard to achieve the Plan B scenario for Japan and for Korea and for Philippines. So in that sense, whatever the United States strategy could shape, we still need the United States security guarantor role in Asia. So we are actually doing whatever we can to induce United States role to be responsible in this region. And of course, that the current Trump 2.0 administration has its own logic of the America First Western Hemisphere as a primary strategic theater, but we are calling upon the White House. Your agenda will be best pursued through the alliance. And in that regard, that I think Indo-Pacific is a special theater that the United States may need to have a special attention. And we are expecting with our mutual efforts, such kind of alliance deterrence structure may also prevail in this region.
Yes, very clever. Thank you. And for the fourth question, Professor Jimbo, many analysts argue that the international system is moving away from the relatively stable frameworks that characterized the post-Cold War era toward a more fragmented and competitive geopolitical environment. In your view, are we entering a long-term phase of structural instability between major powers, or do you believe new forms of balance and strategic coexistence could still emerge in the Indo-Pacific and beyond?
Well, I think that there are a very complex situation that we are facing. And we cannot just trace the autopilot linear projections of the old-fashioned, viewpoint of the international politics can still play out as of 21st century. And I think that one of the great departure from the previous, sense of the world is that the United States remains to be the generous security guarantor who provides the global commons on the security, finance, trade, international system, international institution by providing a lot of its own resources abroad. And they are looking to the global order through engaging the allies and partners across the Pacific and also across the Atlantic. Those are the basic structure of the, Pax Americana, U.S. Hegemons and those structure that we have been familiarized for past many decades. But the United States' own identification of the nation seems to be that America is more like a continental power rather than the maritime power, who are looking at the U.S. border like a Canada, Mexico, and then to expand concentric expansion of what they can see from Washington, D.C. to the world. It really goes to the order of their neighborhood, and then Caribbean states, and then Latin America, like Venezuela and Cuba. And they will also incorporate Greenland as the sphere of influence that the United States are now considering. And then the transatlantic relationship, NATO, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and Iran comes into the picture. And then the United States also seems to be having the notion that the President Trump is trying to engage many of international conflict through the negotiation to realize the world which makes unnecessary for the United States to engage militarily in the theater. So President Trump always connotates that the United States should be getting away from unnecessary military engagement in the world. In that sense, who is the alternative power to sustain the status quo in the military domain, and also who will provide the international public goods in the non-military domain are the remaining question that we all have to ask. In that sense, that for Japanese perspective, we still have a wishful thinking, but really, I think that require United States responsible role in Indo-Pacific because of the reason that the United States is still plays the essential role to create the favorable balance of power for many in Indo-Pacific. At the same time, we also regard that free riding towards the United States and also not being responsible in providing the public goods by ourselves will no longer the game of play. In that sense, that the middle power coalitions and Japan, for example, sustain its regional trade order through the comprehensive, Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP), and those with the financial mechanisms to provide the common goods for a sustainable financial order. And whenever the energy crisis happened as the aftermath of the Hormuz Strait crisis, Asia has been very vulnerable to the external shock on the energy supply, and how much Japan and also Korea can play its stabilizer role seems to be the essential component for emerging kind of dynamics, that how much of the regional order could be sustained by non-American player in the region.
Yes, thank you. Very, very thank you. And for the last question, Professor Jimbo, during the Cold War, escalation was often imagined through clearly identifiable military thresholds. Today, hybrid conflict can emerge gradually through cyber operation, disinformation, economic pressure, infrastructure disruption, and AI-driven system. In such an environment, do you believe the greatest strategic danger is no longer intentional war, but rather the erosion of clarity itself, where a nation may no longer fully understand when a conflict has actually begun?
Yes, I think that is exactly one of the most serious dangers of our time, and which is the erosion of clarity. During the Cold War, escalation also was dangerous, but many of the thresholds were relatively visible. If you step across the line, there will be the escalation. So everybody may realize that this is the restraint that the state needs to remind it. But in terms of the post-Cold War and current situation, the many of those kind of escalation thresholds seems to be invisible, or many actors have a different um, imaginations and the recognition of the what kind of escalation logic they have, and those are, I think, at the seemingly the dangerous point that we are experiencing. First of all, I think those kind of ambiguity weakens the concept of deterrence for sure. And deterrence depends on the ability to identify an attack and also attribute responsibility and also define a credible response. But I think in terms of the cyber operation, disinformation campaign, economic coercion, sabotage of infrastructure, and the use of proxy actors, and which you can find elsewhere in the regions, make attribution and politically, technically very difficult, so that the aggressor can remain below the threshold of the clear retaliation, and the coercion could become quite easier. That's, I think, the one difficulty that we face. And the second, ambiguity increase the risk of miscalculation. And one side you can really go afar and then to coerce the others. But other side thinks that this is already the red line and you have passed. And that rule really creates the unintended escalation between the two sides, because unlike the Cold War era, United States and Soviet Union had a lot of formal, informal conversation. What is the kind of threshold not to surpass? But in the world, which is much more diversified, actors and actors relationship, they don't really have a clear and a sophisticated escalation control mechanism. And that's number two. And the third, we are now entering into the AI and the autonomous system. So this may encompass the time and the blur responsibility even further. So, can we imagine what are the escalation control between AI-driven unmanned system when they encounter together? And if some policymaker decided to shoot down the unmanned system because we are not killing anybody in human, and then that escalation control could be made much more easier. But from the adversary's point of view, that is the attacking against the military assets. And that will also create a lot of a misunderstanding about how to manage the escalation. And I think that those are the main, question that we are facing today. And coming back to the Indo-Pacific question, such kind of accidents, unintended errors, and then also the miscalculation over the perception of the escalation could emerge so easily in by looking at the many of the flashpoints that we encounter. So definitely we need to deepen our sophisticated discussion among the concerned states and the government officials and the scholars like ourselves, and also the informal processes and the journalists would really need to adapt to this new world to create the new lexicon and the language, how we can really create the stable order in the future.
Yes, really, really thank you. It was really an honor and a pleasure listening to you and your opinion. Really, thank you. I hope we can stay in touch maybe. And that's all. Thank you again. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. It's a great
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you again. Very interesting, very edifying. Thank you again, Professor.
Right. So hope that we can see each other in person in the future.
Yes,
Okay.
I hope
Thank
that
you.
so.
All right. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again. Bye bye.